couple of years after the release of the Venom film, I had to go at drawing this. And I'm pretty blooming proud of it because it's pretty cool for when I did it. However, you can kind of see there are a couple things that could probably be done better, like the contrast and the blending. So, I'm gonna have another go. Let's get to it. So onto the materials. Today I'm gonna be using polychromos just on their own. So these are gonna be some nice dark colors to really up that contrast. And then you've got some blues as well, just to kind of gradiate from the darker colors to the highlights. So beginning at the eye, this is kind of like a lens. So around the outside is really dark and it's kind of like, not necessarily a solid kind of shade. It's kind of dapperly with the blacks and the dark blues. And then you kind of gradiate it to the middle, which is gonna be really nice and light with your really light blues. And you kind of like smooth these with the really light grays as well. And then you need to make sure that you leave some really nice sharp highlights. So these are ones that you've got the sharp highlight, which is gonna be really, really light. And then you've got one that's really, a color that's really dark next to it. This just really helps to add some like, really just contrast. That's basically the only way to explain it. Now that I have a pretty like compelling eye, I can start building around it. So this is gonna be where I use the black pencil to go in and just kind of outline where all the darker areas are gonna be. So it's any like, when you're drawing a dog or a horse or just whatever, it's really easy just to define where all the dark things are going, and then you can apply a bit more pressure to those areas depending on if they're darker than others. And then you can grab your lighter pencils, so in this case you've got the greys and the lighter blues, and then kind of just blend them to the lighter areas. And then once you've got the darkest areas and the lightest areas, you can then go in with kind of like a mid-tone kind of pencil, and then you kind of like press fairly firmly down upon it, and then it kind of gradiates them together to get a really nice smooth texture. And especially with this Venom drawing, you really need that smooth texture just to show that he's quite malicey. I then use this paint pen to add the extreme highlights around the face and other areas around the body, just to really show how shiny he is in terms of like the malicey kind of effect on his skin. And then it just really helps to bring those parts forwards and then the darker parts back, which is kind of like the basis of 3D, because you've got the dark ones at the back and you've got the page, which is like kind of like the mid-tone kind of things. And then you've got these highlights, which are done with this pen, which are going to be the third kind of dimension. Here you can see I use a different like selection of reds and pinks for the gums that I'm about to do. And then for his teeth, he's got kind of like a beigey teeth, because obviously he doesn't brush his teeth, so he's got disgusting teeth. And then you can kind of use this beige as kind of the shadow and with the grey, because I find that when you use too much of the black and too much of the white, it sometimes can look a bit weird, even though using quite harsh white highlights on the teeth can make it look quite shiny and salivary, which is obviously what we want. When moving on to like the tenderly bits on the side of his mouth, it's really important to kind of make them look as taut as possible, because like another problem with the one I showed you at the start is the bits on the corner of his mouth, they kind of look loose and they were a bit weird. And I think I used what's called a wax crayon behind them instead of a pencil. So all these factors kind of made it just look a bit weird. However, on this one, I've kind of tried to make them look as taut as possible, and there's a lot more of them. And there's some of them are red to kind of show that you've got the mouth area and the gum, and then you've got the black. So it's kind of like the joining point between the gummy, the gummy sections and then the malicey skin kind of thing. When moving on to the tongue, there's kind of like a basis of a cylindrical shape, which is, yeah, obviously there. But there's also like many different like muscular structures on the tongue as well that kind of need to be obeyed, as well as the cylindrical kind of shape. So you've got obviously the base of it's going to be darker because it's the furthest away from the light source. But then you've also got the little lumps of the muscle structures as well that need to be darker at the bottom and then lighter at the top. So you can obviously do the darkest bits with the black, and then you kind of go with a dark red and slowly get lighter and lighter red. You can then go into like a pinky kind of thing, and then you've got an orange as well that you can kind of use, which works quite well as well. But the real icing on the cake when it comes to this tongue structure and the gums is just really those really harsh highlights, because this just makes it look salivary and wet and disgusting, just as it should be. As I move further back into the head, I start to kind of darken the darker areas and the highlights as well. This is because obviously the light source is ahead, so the shoulder area and the kind of necky bits, they're going to be further away from the light source, so they need to be darker than the front of the head. This kind of gives the whole appearance of this 3D image that we are basically all aiming for. So obviously, and also the detail, the kind of like muscle and shapes, they're also become a bit more stretched as well, as the muscles and the shoulder are obviously bigger than the ones in the face. So you need to kind of apply this as well, and it'll really help to just bring the image off the page. It's the only way to really say it. It's also worth mentioning that the more details you kind of add to his body, in terms of like just little shapes and lines, just here they're kind of in the general gist of where the big shades are and the big highlight areas are. It just kind of really makes it more appealing to look at, and it becomes a bit more interesting. I think this is one of the main issues with the one I showed you at the beginning, because there were quite big areas of highlights, but there wasn't really much going on within these highlights. However, on this one, you can kind of see there's a lot going on. There's lots of like different shapes and different like nooky bits and things like that, and layering. And it really helps just to bring him off the page and just make him just go to that next level of kind of awesomeness. That's a good word to use. And the most important thing to add is the nice drooling saliva with the acrylic pen and some pencils, just to like add the shade with it. And that's the end of the video. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the second part where I colour in this Carnage, and I'll see you next time with more creative content.